Good evening, Binda.
Good evening, Henry.
Good evening.
Long time.
Yeah.
You're back to your base.
Yeah, back. Then we took vaccine, so just 2-3 days. Yeah.
Stanley, all okay? I just tried to click there. I don't know if...
Yeah, it's fine, Binda. I'll manage.
Thank you, Ishita, for introducing Get Set Up to all our guests. Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to this platform. We are here today to listen to the topic, the second in its series, Food for Body, Mind and Soul. Dr. Gokani by now needs no formal introduction on this platform. Most of you have already met him earlier. We at Get Set Up are happy to have Dr. Anand Gokani once again. We started with him on the 15th of December. He did a session on facts about diabetes. Then he spoke on solitude versus loneliness. And now we are here for the Food for Body, Mind and Soul series. Last Friday we had on body. Today he's going to focus more on mind. And next Friday, if you haven't registered already, do block your seat when he's going to talk about the soul. Dr. Gokani, who runs 2 clinics and is a consultant at the Bombay Hospital, has earned his postgraduate degree in medicine from the Grant Medical College, which is affiliated to the JJ Hospital. His research paper in diabetes has been published in The Lancet, a medical journal published in the UK. Dr. Gokani has also conducted several seminars, lectures, and workshops on subjects such as stress management, diabetes in all its complications, alternative medicine, nature cure, and at times subjects like hope, faith, solitude, aging, and a host of other issues. He is a panel doctor for Castrol India Limited. He has also conducted several youth camps for Cathedral and John Cannon School, Villa Teresa School in Mumbai, and El Pro International School in Pune. Dr. Gokani has been appointed as the trustee of Bombay Medical Aid Foundation, with which he has been associated for several years. He also has been conducting seminars on diabetes awareness, all aspects of diabetes, lifestyles and health, cardiac disease and rehabilitation, stress management seminars, several seminars on Gandhian thought and philosophy in Sevagram at the Institute of Gandhian Studies, the MGM Medical College and Kasturba Hospital in Maharashtra, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh and other states. He has participated in Gandhian activities in India and in France. Other areas of interest: treatment of chronic disease by unorthodox treatment, that is raw food therapy, role of nutrition in disease, and the treatment of disease with nutritional adjustments. With this, I invite Dr. Gokani to get started with his talk. I would request all of you to stay on mute. Ishita has already requested you. We will have a 10-minute Q&A session towards the end, and we will try and take, we will come up with questions, but of course, we will try and stay with generic kind of responses instead of personal responses. Thank you. Once again, a warm welcome to Dr. Gokani.
Thank you very much, Binda. It's really nice to be back again with you for the 3rd time. And I'd like to say this to you, that every time I come here, I find the bar you raise much higher than what it was last time. And every time I seem to have to jump higher, but I try my best not to disappoint you. For those who may not have been with us last time, this is a series of very simply titled Food for Body, Mind and Soul. And what we discussed last time was food for the body, that is the physical body. First, we discussed about the connection between the body, mind and soul, and I likened it to an exotic car maybe a Cadillac or maybe a Lexus or any of the fashionable ones which we see now, where the body is the body of the car, the mind is the machine inside that body, and the driver is the soul. And we saw that if this trio or triumvirate has to reach anywhere successfully and to achieve something like a purpose, like a goal, then all three have to be in tip-top condition, and their alignment should be perfect. Their coordination and cooperation should be perfect. And likewise, in the human body, the body, mind, and soul are exactly like that, where the body is the body of the car, the mind is the machine of the car, and the soul is the driver. We then went on to say, if we have to have them working to the topmost potential, then we need to nourish them, we need to nurture them, and we need to maintain them. And towards that end, we talked about the kind of food that the body requires. And in that, we decided that food for the body is sunshine, air, water, and food itself. And food itself being a very large topic, we broke it up into 3 chapters. The first chapter was the rules of eating. The second chapter was the do's and don'ts, what you eat and what you shouldn't eat, the tick category and the cross category. And thereafter, we went on to meal planning from the above rules. And this gave us a very good overview of how we could nourish ourselves, at the same time entertain ourselves through food also, but not damage ourselves because of involuntarily eating wrong foods. So having done that, now we move on to the next chapter, which is food for the mind. Now, food for the mind is a little more exotic than food for the body, because body is something we see, tangible, is there in front of us, and it's the food that we eat, we taste it, and we also use all our 5 senses to enjoy it. But the mind is invisible, intangible, and to talk about something that's invisible, intangible becomes all the more difficult, because what someone hasn't seen is very difficult for him to talk about. But we still talk about it from our experience, from our thinking, our ruminations, and our cultivated thinking. So I'd like to make an allusion to a poem which later became a song written by Sahir Ludhianvi. The title of that poem was Tora Man Darpan Kehlaye, which means your mind is a mirror. And in that, he describes all the things that the mind could be in poetic form. And I would urge each one of you to go on Google or find access to the lyrics of that song. And it tells you exactly how deep the mind is. And if I have to summarize it in brief, it says that the mind sees both evil and good. The mind doesn't miss anything. The mind is both God and saint. And the mind has 1,000 different forms. The mind is like a mirror on which, if we keep it clean, we can almost see everything. And the mind can never be cheated. You could cheat the world, but you can't cheat the mind. And it's your mind that is always looking at you, no matter where you are, even in the darkest of dark corners. And it is this versatile organ, or this versatile phenomenon, since mind is something that's intangible, is what we are going to discuss today. And the more I read about it, initially I thought food for the mind may be a very short chapter, and I could wind it up in 15 minutes. I could if I wanted to, but then you wouldn't have felt even 5% of what the mind actually connotes. So the second thing is that compared to body, there is a Hindi phrase which said, Tan ki daulat dhalti chhaya, which means the wealth of our body is a fading shadow, which will one day fade, evaporate, and disappear. Man ka dhan anmol. This is just the first line of that poem. I don't wish to go into the depth, but this conveys what I want to say, that what we run after our body, we maintain our body, we appreciate the body, is only a fading shadow, whereas the wealth of our mind is priceless. And therefore, it becomes more imperative for us to nurture the mind and look after it and to train it to get the best out of it. It's a machine with so many apps that we don't even know 1% of those apps. So if you spend one lifetime discovering those apps and using them, you don't know where you can reach with your true potential. I'd like to tell you that there's a medical story I'd like to tell you. And I read it somewhere. This is about a physician. He was a cardiologist. So it's a story based on heart patients. This cardiologist was a very eminent cardiologist in some hospital in the United States of America. And it is from his writings that I pick up this story. And I'd like to share it with you. In this cardiologist had admitted one patient just for a routine checkup because he had to go for an insurance policy renewal. And considering his age, he was expected to go through a full checkup. So this cardiologist admitted him. And in the during the investigations, they found something. So when they reached this bedside, and you know that a good cardiologist in a teaching hospital will have a retinue of doctors following him, doctors, nurses, and other assistants. And they all learn from what he finds. So during his physical examination, he put his stethoscope on this man's chest. And the man was a completely normal man, had just come in for a routine checkup. Now, when he put his stethoscope on the chest, he heard a murmur, which is an odd sound, different from normal heart sounds. And he looked very seriously at all the students, and he said, there is a typical murmur of TS. And all the students very obediently, interestedly put their stethoscope on the chest and nodded in agreement. And they were all very happy, it seemed, to have learnt this new finding. After they left the room, he gets a call in the evening that this patient has suddenly turned serious. And he was very breathless. His lungs were filled with fluid, and he had to be shifted to the ICU and kept on pressor support, which is the support to maintain his blood pressure and breathing. So this man then issued instructions of what to do, and the treatment was given. And over the next 3 days, this man recovered and finally got discharged. Now, when he came to the consulting room to pick up his reports and to get an assessment of his health, the doctor asked him, he said, you came into the hospital in good shape and you're in good health, then what made you turn ill? And the man said, doctor, you came on a visit to my room and you told all your students that I'm dying. And that upset me no end. And I was so stressed that by evening I was breathless. So he said, but I never said anything like this. And he said, the student said, the patient said that you told your students that I have TS. So the doctor smiled and asked him, so what do you understand by TS? So he said, terminal state. I thought I am dying. He says, no, it's not that. It's tricuspid stenosis, which is an incidental finding in a healthy person and with which you can have a very normal lifespan. He says, oh, and he was so relieved. But this incident goes to underscore that how our mind can influence our physical health. If our mind interprets something the wrong way, it interprets it and thereafter sets off a train of events that leads to the body following in the same direction. Another story, an elderly lady got admitted in the same hospital, was extremely breathless, and she was put on oxygen. She was in the ICU, and the doctor, along with his retinue of doctors, arrived. The doctor puts his stethoscope on the chest, and he listens carefully, and he says, I'd like all of you to hear this very distinct gallop. And they all listened. The normal heart sounds are lup dub, and in this case it was lup dup, and it sounds like horses were racing. Now, having said this, and all the students having confirmed their finding, learned something, they all walked out. And as soon as they walked out, this patient, by evening, they got news that she is off oxygen. And by the next day, she was shifted to a private room. And to everyone's astonishment, on the third day, she was discharged. Now, they thought that this lady is on her last leg and she would be critical, and it would be only a miracle that could save her. But she went home. And when she came for follow-up, the doctor said, you know something, you made a miraculous recovery. I had no idea that you would be going home. She says, doctor, I felt if the doctor has faith in me, then who am I to dispute that? So doctor looked at her quizzically and said, how did you feel that I have faith in you? And she said, you told your students that my heart had a gallop in it. And I thought, if my heart is galloping, I think I'm good for another 5 years. And the doctor again smiled. And he told her, he says, I'm very happy that you feel this way, and stay well and keep coming back for follow-up. And we hope that you always remain well and productive. But he then told his students that, you know, what you say in front of your patient or what you say in front of anybody, it is the mind that can influence your healing. And this is something that I have seen throughout my medical practice, that if I ignore that aspect of the person's development or this person's treatment program, I'm not going to be successful enough. So if I treat any patient, my first attempt after getting the basic history would be to find out what's in the mind, what's their mindset, what's their attitude, and what's ailing them, because they are ailing. And that helps a lot to bring things out. So there's a book which is titled very aptly, and from the title itself you learn so much. Mind as healer, mind as slayer. The mind can be used to slay a person, as we saw in the first case. The mind can be used to heal a person, as we saw in the second case. Both these are the extent to where the mind can work. And all this happens, which has been studied by two new sciences. And these are very long words. I think they must be the longest words in the English dictionary, second to supercalifragilistic, which you remember from our childhood. This one word is psychoneuroimmunology, one word. And the other word is psychoneuroendocrinology. Now, psychoneuroimmunology means psycho, meaning your thinking, can influence your nerves to influence your immunity, and you can make your immunity work the way you want it to work, or allow your immunity to destroy you if you don't actively participate by using your psychoneuro. So this psychoneuroimmunology and psychoneuroendocrinology, which means you can influence every gland in your body. Every gland means pituitary, thyroid, pancreas, adrenal, ovary, and testes, and any other of the smaller glands. All can be influenced by your thinking. Today we have an epidemic of glandular diseases, epidemic of endocrine diseases, of which the greatest one is diabetes. But the important thing is that diabetes also is clubbed in a disease bracket called psychosomatic diseases. When I was a kid, psychosomatic diseases was called as someone pretending to be sick. But now you understand that psycho means mind and soma means body. Mind influencing the body to attain a physically tangible state, which is like diabetes, where your blood sugars are high, or thyroid disease, where you have low production of thyroid or high production of thyroid, and so many other diseases. The most common in young girls is the PCOD, or polycystic ovarian disease, which makes their complete chemistry go haywire, and has caused so much heartburn and so much agony in the young girls because of this disease. But it all starts from the mind. It's a completely different chapter. It is a social chapter, which I wonder if I can tackle on such a platform. But man is geared always for the flight or fright reaction. Flight or fright is two words to describe stress. We all talk about stress as a cause of disease. We all talk about stress as a killer and a silent killer. And we all ask each other, do you have stress? And we talk of mental stress and so on. But stress is basically a perceived situation for which we are preparing either to fight or to fright. So if you fight, then you have to prepare to fight. And if you feel that you cannot fight, then you prepare for flight, how to escape from it. And this preparedness is at the cost of very precious nutrients. I did allude to it last time that this preparedness causes a drain. Stress is funded by carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. Carbohydrates come in abundance, but vitamins and minerals are in very small traces, and very often vitamin mineral deficiency is in a person who is perpetually stressed, whose temperament is stressed, because stress burns up vitamins and minerals like nothing else. And therefore it becomes very important for us to recognize this fact so that we can preserve our vitamins and minerals for more productive activity, rather than have this hole in the bucket, which overnight as we sleep drains the bucket dry, and we have to keep refilling it with not only nutritional supplements, but with artificial pharmacological supplements in order to make good that loss. So we have stress is another thing in the mind that has to be dealt with. Now we come to memory. Now we have so many things in our mind and we keep expanding our memory, and this memory which needs to be nourished. So memory is nourished by its own special nutrition. Let's go back to student days. When you have a child going to school, we have in school several chapters, but let's say I just say mother, but it means both parents. Let's say the mother is very ambitious and wants the child to be a scientist from the age of 5. And she encourages the child to go into science, and the child gets interested and concentrates only on science or only on mathematics, but doesn't feel interested because there's no encouragement, no exposure, and no will to pursue subjects like history, geography, literature, art, craft, sport, and so on. Now this child, by dearth of sheer concentration, becomes the best at science in his class. So he scores 80%, whereas the others are balanced children who score 60% in science, but also do history and also do geography and also do rhythm and also do dance and also do sport and so on. So they're jack of all trades, but very mediocre in everything, whereas this student is master of one trade. Now, when he goes into a higher class, he becomes a gold medalist. Now he is one of the toppers in the school, not only just the class, whereas the others are inching their way upwards in a whole lot of other subjects, both sport and academic. When he goes even higher, and let's say he approaches 10th standard, now he's a gold medalist in the state or in the country, and he's an asset and so on. But all his other faculties are almost dwindled and frittered away, but he is a scientist to the core. He seems to become an asset to the community and to the country. Then he goes into college, he performs well, but there in college he meets people who have now improved to the extent where they can give him a tough fight. And they are also good at literature and all the other faculties I mentioned. They have been progressing steadily up to university level, whereas this person has only progressed in one field. Now what happens in university level, when faced with so much competition, he suddenly finds that he is bored with the subject, but he has nowhere else to look and he doesn't know what else to do. Whereas the others are still fresh because they are growing in a widely different array of subjects and activities. And each activity is helping them to master the first activity. And therefore, they are growing in everything. And so they are becoming now very versatile all around us. So when it comes to finishing graduation and when going into the world and you're faced with so many challenges, you find that those challenges leave you daunted and you don't have any more moral or emotional energy to deal with them. And the science that you studied has become stale and you now lose interest. And those people then break down and start becoming dropouts. And that leads to severe deterioration in their full potential. Whereas the others have started advancing and forging ahead. And if you see, if you take any of the known people, you take the known brilliant people. I start with a medical great called Albert Schweitzer. He was a orator, he was a scientist, he was a surgeon, and he was a pianist. And he could compete at a high level in all these fields. Then there was Leonardo da Vinci, scientist, artist, painter, and so many other things. Then Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, masterpiece all around us in so many different subjects. All of them exemplified just this one fact, that if you want to exploit your mind, use 20 different faculties and train all of them because each one cooperates to make the other one better. So science helps art and art helps humanity and humanity helps geography. Geography helps football helps cricket, and like that you can become a master at so many things if you train yourself in different things. So that statement, which have often been repeated to children, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, stems from this fact that if he plays, his mind becomes fresh and he is able to work on his studies again. And therefore, it's become very important to get the best out of a student. Have to all the time, and that's the scope of building our mind to its fullest potential. Our mind has another faculty which bears out thinking, and that is emotions. Emotions are something that we both cherish and also fear. There are, like food, there are cross emotions and there are tick emotions. There are positive emotions and there are negative emotions. Like I did for food, I'll talk about emotions also. I'll talk of the positive ones first. The positive ones are hope, faith, love, peace, happiness, joy, compassion, and so many others. Hope, faith, love. Hope is something which I exemplified in my second story, where that old lady who was dying suddenly was presented with hope, and how she harnessed hope to become something better. Same way, faith, that also played a part in her growth. Faith in her doctor, faith in the Almighty, faith in her destiny, faith in herself. And these are important qualities to not just put for the textbook, not just write them down in a corner, but actually implement them in your daily life. So hope, faith, love, peace, joy, happiness, compassion, and so on. Now, all these, they act by a kind of hormone. These are not exactly hormones, but they are chemicals which come in like into your bloodstream like hormones. And these are endorphins and enkephalins. So when you get happiness, you get a release of endorphins and enkephalins, which lead to a feeling of well-being. And that's what helps you to get better from wherever you are. Similarly, they also release a hormone called oxytocin, which is the well-being hormone. Of course, in large dose, it causes the uterus to contract at the time of delivery, and that itself leads to one of the greatest joy of giving birth to a child and then holding that child close to your heart. So the bond between a mother and a child is promoted by the levels of oxytocin at the time of birth. And oxytocin is released with every happy situation, every compassionate act, every empathetic move. For example, I'll tell you how infectious oxytocin can be. Is that if I'm walking on the street and I see a blind man trying to cross the street, and I interrupt my normal journey, hold his hand, and help him across the street so that he reaches the other side safely, I feel a rush of feeling good. That feel good comes from the release of oxytocin from a good deed done. Not only that, somebody who sees me do it, he's not done it himself, he's seen me do it, will come up to me and tap me on the shoulder and tell me, that was a nice thing that you did. And he also feels good because seeing me do it, he also felt a release of oxytocin with his faith in humanity restored. And when he goes back and does the same good deed to somebody else, he spreads the same goodness and gets a rush of oxytocin. And so oxytocin inducing activities are infectious. If you do it, you will find everyone around you starts doing them. So you have to start with yourself. If you want yourself to feel good, you want society to feel good, and the more you get seen doing these good Samaritan acts or good acts of kindness, they lead to a sense of well-being, which then through psychoneuroendocrinology release good hormones, or through psychoneuroimmunology build up your immune system. So a happy, compassionate person has definitely a better immunity than a person of the opposite values. So this is as far as the good emotions are concerned, but the bad emotions, they take a big toll. And the bad emotions, the four worst emotions. The four worst emotions are anger, hatred, jealousy, and greed. They destroy you like nothing else. Anger and hatred go together. You are angry with someone, corollary, you hate that person. You're jealous of someone, corollary, you want what that person has, and so you become greedy. So jealousy and greed go hand in hand, anger and hatred go hand in hand. And the two, anger is natural, hatred is natural, but when they are momentary. If they happen momentarily, you expressed it, you gave vent to your human feelings, and you got over it, and it's over. But if you keep it inside yourself and appear like you're placid from outside, like a duck on the surface of water, looks very peaceful floating around the whole lake, but underneath the surface of water, the legs are furiously paddling, and we can't see that. So a man who suppresses his anger, or a woman for that matter, suppresses his anger, is like him holding a hot coal in his hand, but refusing to release it and throw it at the person who he hates or who he is angry against. Now, if he keeps that coal in his hand, it can only do one thing: burn his hand and not do anything to the person who he is angry with. And therefore, it becomes very important to give vent to such feelings and not keep them inside. And 99% of diseases, directly or indirectly, are because we don't have the ability nor the know-how how to vent. And in a fast-paced world like today, where everybody is busy all the time, there is no one to vent to. And if you don't find someone to vent to, then you keep it inside yourself, and it bites you and eats you up from within. Like white ants eat up wood, these emotions eat up your inner fabric, and at the end of it, it collapses like dust. So anger, hatred, jealousy, and greed are four of the worst human emotions when suppressed. Though they are natural to happen momentarily, they should happen. Otherwise, you have lost your humaneness and you become more saintly. But that is a target which we hope to reach. Till we reach it, we remain human. and therefore we must find vents. And I'll tell you how we can do that after I finish all the negative emotions. So that's the important negative emotions, 4 of them, and the other also go in pairs is guilt and grief. Now, guilt and grief are terribly, terribly close to each other, and one of them will always be present if you're faced with an act which you don't want to do. Let's say you have to take care of something or someone who you don't want to do, or you have to do an act which is compulsory. If you don't do it, though it is compulsory, don't do it, you get guilt because your inner being says, I must do it. And you don't want to do it. You means the mind doesn't want to do it, but your conscience says you have to do it. If you do it despite hating it, you get grief because you're doing something you don't enjoy. So either guilt kills you or grief kills you unless you accept that act with open arms and say that if I have to do it, let me just do it happily and let me enjoy it. But if you don't, then you're destined to suffer guilt or grief. And between the guilt and grief, you will be always torn, and something or the other will be eating into your fabric. So there's no escape from it. One or the other is going to take you. And then comes fear, anxiety, depression, loneliness. I don't need to elaborate more on these emotions. Everybody knows when you have fear locked up in your heart, when you have depression means you don't feel like speaking to anyone. That's the time when you need to speak to someone. And when you have so many different kinds of emotions which are not even mentioned, you need to deal with them. So when I say deal with them, I say there are only 2 ways of dealing with them. Jesse Owens was an international athlete, and he also turned out after his retirement into like a philosopher, a friend philosopher guide to many people. And his pet statement, which I still quote, is the more we talk and the more we walk, there's nothing in this world that we can't sort. So anytime you have a problem, you have any negative emotion eating you out, if you went off for a long walk at a stride which is your which is a comfortable pace, you will find that your thinking becomes more organized, more logical. Everything starts to fall into place, and at the end of your walk, you feel like you have suddenly tidied up a very untidy room in your brain, and now you can deal with it very peacefully. So physical activity is very important to relieve stress, especially negative varieties of stress. I would not say that the positive emotions give stress. In fact, they help you to unwind from stress. So physical activity is important. And there is a scientific truth for this because the walking is a rhythmic activity, and that center is situated in one hemisphere of your body, of your brain. And the thinking center is another rhythmic activity situated very close to the walking center. Now, you cannot order your brain to think logically because the brain is not capable of that. But you can order your body to walk rhythmically. And when you start walking rhythmically, automatically the impulse of the rhythmic walking center will overflow on the rhythmic thinking center, and thinking becomes also orderly. So, sitting in a rocking chair and trying to sort out your problem is the worst way of solving it. Take off and start walking, or go for a long walk, or go for any rhythmic activity like swimming or cycling or whatever at a pace conducive to your health. And you will find that everything starts to fall into place. And that's why a regular walk, which I mentioned in Food for the Body, has very deep connotations in the mind also. And the second method, walking was one. The second method is talking, for which you need someone to listen. In today's times, in the olden days, there used to be always a person at home. Children went out, husband went out, the wife was at home. She would be like a rock, and the rest would be like a river. And the river and rock would meet because the rock was always there when the river touched the rock. But now, with women also leaving the house, you find that both have become rivers and never the twain shall meet. And therefore, there's either both are tired or both are lack of time or both have no inclination. And therefore, the rate of suppressed emotions has increased exponentially because there is nobody to discuss them with. And there are no anchors left in society. And therefore, it becomes very important that if you love someone, if that person comes to you and opens his mouth to speak, my advice is don't even breathe, because even a harsh sound of your breath might discourage that person from talking. Allow that person to talk, don't interrupt, don't give your judgmental advice. Let that person finish. They'll start tentatively, they'll see that you're listening, they'll start opening up. And when they finished opening up, you take 24 hours before you give your judgment. Don't give a reflex knee-jerk response, however true you may think it is, because you may just destroy his house of cards because he is already fragile. You will give a wrong judgment, a wrong, unanalyzed thought expressed can destroy all the efforts of helping someone to become de-stressed. And therefore, it becomes an art to listen also, not just to think and not just to talk. But, there's a saying I read in one poster, one of these memes that travel around. It says that when someone asks me, how are you? And I say, I am fine. I am silently hoping that that guy will say, look me square in the eyes and tell me the truth. When I say I am fine, he says, look me square in the eye and tell me the truth. And that has often been employed by me. And I have seen that whenever I said it, the other person nearly breaks down and then spills the beans like nowhere else, because he was hoping that someone will ask. Otherwise, I am fine is the standard answer. He's hoping someone will say, I have the time to listen. So talking is another method of getting rid of stress, getting your mind in order and allowing your mind to grow. But in today's times, if you don't have someone to talk with, you don't keep it suppressed, then you talk to a piece of paper, you talk to a journal. And that's where the latest therapeutic measure, journaling, is introduced. Journaling means asking the person to write his prevailing emotions on paper in raw form, in analytical and detailed, frank and candid form. If that person starts doing it, for example, if he suppressed anger, they say, you write on top, I am extremely angry today. Then you ask yourself why. So you say, I am very angry because I was not allowed to do this by so and so. I'm angry with that person. I'm angry with the situation. I'm angry because X, Y, Z. Then you say, why does this anger happen? Why did that person say no? Then you say, I think that person said no because he just likes to bully me, or actually that person said no because I should not be doing this. And like this, the analysis will go on. And as you write and as you analyze, you will find the points. You can go back to the points which are written earlier, whereas in thinking, you can't do that, because by the time you reach the 10th point, the first 5 points are forgotten. You don't know what you thought in the first 5 points. So when you put it down on paper, it is there for good. And as you keep writing, you become more and more analytical, and the more and more you become analytical, the lighter your mind feels. Whilst writing, people have broken down, people have cried, people have laughed, people have felt all different kinds of emotions just gushing out. And in that situation, at the end of it, when it's all on paper, they find that they are completely relieved. And then the question of secrecy arrives, that what if someone read all this? But I'll tell you something, in modern time, no one has time to read anything that somebody else wrote. He may just about read what he himself wrote. And therefore, I wouldn't fear that. But if you did fear that, destroy the paper completely, because it's out of your system at least. It doesn't have to remain in your locker. Destroy the paper and throw it away. But you got it out of your system. So don't not write because you are afraid of someone reading it. Write and throw it away, and you will be fine. Therefore, journaling has become a very important way of de-stressing. In fact, I think every autobiography written in the world is a result of journaling, because I don't think anyone sat down on a table and said that I'm going to write about my life history. He just kept writing what he felt and what he thought. And when he died, people discovered those pages and said, this is his life. And they published it as an autobiography. Biographies are analyzed life, but autobiographies are journals. And journals serve very important purpose, because a journal helps you to examine your life. Socrates said once that the unexamined life is not worth living, and how true he was. The unexamined life is not worth living means every 10 years, every 5 years, you need to examine your life. Do I have a goal? Is my life a purposeful life? Am I going ahead where I wanted to be? Or am I just drifting like a leaf in autumn? Am I just going aimlessly here and there? Am I just breathing to survive? Or is every breath of mine accounted for? And if you got an answer to that, you're on the right track. And if you don't have an answer to that, then I'm afraid you need to examine your life. Otherwise, it's not worth living. So, remembering Socrates, I think that one motto is something that I always felt is important. I put it in my life. I also advise others to put it in their life, because it definitely changes the complexion of your life. We have gone through a lot. I'd ask Binda, do we have time to go on now? We go for questions.
Yeah, Doctor, I think we'll pause here because we would want to give our participants some time to,
yes,
if they have any questions.
I have actually finished.
Yeah, I know these are your topics, and these topics it's very hard to talk on such, great topics for 5, 10, 50, 20 minutes or even 40 minutes. But we will have to take the Q&A. So I would request people who have questions, you can raise your hand and we'll call out to you. You can unmute yourself. We have Minal who wants to ask a question, and then after Minal, Premila can come in, okay?
Moisha. Good evening, doctor. Thank you so much. Doctor, question is, we have a mind when, for example, we want to eat some pani puri. So one part of us will say eat, one part will say don't eat. So do we have two minds or it's only one mind?
That's a very, very interesting question. But you know, the answer to that question is in my next time's lecture. That is, I'll tell you a preview that there are two voices in every mind. When you debate an issue, you're actually debating pros and cons. You're playing chess with a person that lives inside your mind. And that person we call in various words instinct, intuition, conscience, soul, and so many other things. And that conversation is between one with a loud voice, aggressive voice, hostile voice, and the other is a soft, chiding, and sometimes critical, sometimes persuasive. These are the two qualities of the two minds, two voices. One voice is that of your instinct, which I dare say belongs to previous lifetimes also. And it has the experience of 100 lifetimes. And from that experience, it gives you a balanced opinion on your immediate act. Whereas your naughty mind, which is loud and boisterous, is a voice that is only seeing 10 feet ahead and wants to enjoy the moment. And therefore, you will be happiest when both voices walk and talk in the same direction. You will die of guilt and grief if you walk opposite directions in the tug and twist of conflict. And therefore, you have to strike a balance. You want to eat pani puri, as a simple example, you don't gorge on 50 pani puris. You have 5, and make sure that it is not more often than once a week. And one out of, I said to you in the food chapter, that out of 21 meals in a week, if you take 3 according to what your mind wants, and 18 according to what your instinct wants or advises you, you're on a good batting wicket. So don't worry about it. So when
No,
you're
I'm not
doing it,
worried.
no, I'm saying not
No,
worry. Saying
no, what do I do is I postpone it indefinitely.
no, don't even do that, because sometimes the craving mounts, and when the
Yeah.
craving mounts, when you break into 10,000 pieces. So satisfied when the craving is a small flame, you will settle yourself with 3 and you will move on. But if you keep craving for it every day, when you break down, you will need 50, and it would have been tantamount to eating 3 on the first day. So I think if you get a strong enough feeling, if you're not willing to walk in the direction of that small voice happily, then tell the small voice, let's compromise. You walk with me for 3, then I'll walk with you for 7, and enjoy it. Because ultimately, I said to you last time also, that if you eat your beer and frank with cheer and thank, you'll be a lot more healthy than if you have your bread and sprouts with dread and doubts. So it's your mind's attitude that's important. You may be on the right track when you say I eat salad, but your mind wants pani puri. So when you do it, be reasonable, but do it. Second question.
Yeah, thanks. Premila, can you come in? And after that, we will take Deepak Singh.
Ma'am, sir, I couldn't follow guilt and grief.
Yeah. What did you not follow?
Guilt and grief.
Guilt is a feeling of being, you feel bad. You feel bad that you did something wrong, and you want to rectify it. And when you do something wrong, something inside you keeps on eating into you, keeps on hammering you, silently, quietly irritating you, telling you that you did wrong, till you sort it. So that's a feeling of guilt, and that guilt can increase in volume the more you neglect the thing that you're supposed to do. Whereas grief is a feeling of severe unhappiness because you're doing something which has to be done, but you don't want to do it because your mind is clashing with your inner voice. So many times, if you are forced to do something you don't want to do, then you are conflicted between guilt and grief. But if you sit down and reason that in life there are certain things which we have to do and certain things we want to do, might as well do all of them happily, then you know that whatever you're doing has to be done, so you do it happily. If you do it happily, there's neither guilt nor grief. So it's important to negotiate with your mind and come to terms with it, that you have to do certain things happily, certain things which are forcibly done by you. I mean, you must do them, and certain things that you want to do, and you go ahead and do that also. And therefore, it becomes very important to learn that reasoning, which we'll talk about next time.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank
Many
you.
thanks.
Thank you. We'll invite Deepak Singh to ask his question, please. Unmute करके आप पूछ सकते हैं. And,
yes, ma'am. Thank you.
We just have about 3 minutes more, so we'll take. I'm seeing more hands raised. So at 7:05, we'll take a hard stop. Okay. Thank you.
So my question is only, what is the relation between the mind and meditation? Whether my meditation useful for to
meditation is extremely useful. Extremely useful because meditation helps you to deepen, it gives you depth in your mind, whereas everyday education, everyday experiences give length and breadth. So we have a lot of length and breadth, but we don't have too much depth, and that depth comes from meditation. But techniques of meditation, though largely similar, have to be learnt the right way. Meditation is not just sitting still in one place. The attitude, and I'm going to deal with it in the next lecture because meditation comes in that chapter. But
Okay, sir.
to tell you in short, meditation improves the depth in your thinking, in your mind, and in your functioning. It's a very useful tool.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can have Mr. Bhargava.
Yeah, doctor, I think so. The saying, that's just a man vesa tan. Is it correct? And
Yes.
second, the good hormones can be released by listening a good songs or very loud songs.
Good songs, good thoughts, good write-up, good reading,
Yeah.
good conversation.
Good write-up is very difficult, but still listening a song, listening a good music, yeah,
Yes.
it releases a good
It-
hormones.
You see the sounds of nature and good music
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
in sync with your mental waves, and therefore they calm your waves. But noise which is like traffic noise or
Oh,
very loud and raucous music, it agitates your brain and makes your brain sick. There's a saying that a fast mind, especially the minds that multitask, and a fast mind is a sick mind. A slow mind is a healthy mind, and a still is a divine mind. And our endeavor should be to make our mind still, because in a still mind, without the waste of any energy, you can achieve continuously without tiring your mind. So if I have to draw a graph of how a mind functions, if you have to travel from point A to point B, then a fast mind travels like this. And that graph is a very wide amplitude graph. And if you were to keep point A fixed and to stretch point B to make that wavy graph into a flat line, point B may be 10 miles away. And that's the amount of work you would have achieved if your mind was still. And therefore, the endeavor is to reduce the fluctuations in your mind till it becomes a straight line. And so the energy spent to go from point A to point B is just enough, and you can use the spare energy to do other things. So a fast mind is a sick mind, a slow mind is a healthy mind, but a still mind is a divine mind. So
still mind, you have to think a lot of things comes in the mind when you're still.
yeah, there are more things to talk about on that issue, which
Yeah, we'll have to, in the
Thank you.
interest of time, I think we will have to
Thank
move
you very
on.
much. Thank you,
So
doctor.
we
I
will
have one
take,
question. I have been waiting for 5 minutes, madam.
yeah,
I only
Naveen ji,
wanted
1
to
minute.
know. If
I'm
not, then
coming
next
to
time.
you.
Okay. No, next time it's all right.
I'm coming
No,
to
go
you,
ahead.
Naveen ji. After Gopa, Naveen ji, and then Padmini.
Go ahead.
Hello, sir. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that other than meditation, do we have any other therapy or exercise to keep our brain very cool and we don't have temper or stress and we only have positive things? So any small tools which
There
we
is
can
a
do it in our daily?
there is a attitude which I can tell you, and you can call it a tool if you want. And that attitude is, you must practice, and very seriously practice, and we'll discuss this more next time. Practice to live in here and now. When you practice to live in the here and now, you can only give your best to this moment. If you
Okay, so
think
in
of what
present, in present,
sorry,
staying in present.
staying in absolute, staying in present. Present moment
Okay.
means here and now. If you think of the
Mhm.
past and future all the time, your brain gets agitated because you have fear the unknown or regret the past. So don't allow these two
Okay.
feelings. And once you practice
Okay.
it, you live the here and now. There's no stress.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Naveen ji, you can unmute and ask your question.
I have only one thing: why people reject or ignore so much to a level that the other side gets triggered, though there has been patience waiting, or they don't accept in old age. Youngsters, especially, or grief or anything, they will say it's okay, okay. And it seems sometimes we are in a confusion of all this wealth of knowledge and meditation, it comes to zero. So that time I try to be calm and okay, not talk. But then what makes me upset is not what you are not listening or my point is how to manage that emotion. You know, when you're it triggers up.
You mean how to manage the irritation, anger, which arises from the fact when
From a
younger
long
people.
time, people, whenever you meet the person, he ignores you. So relative ignore you, world ignores you. I am happy within myself with the little means. But my point is, why not give a helping hand to others and say, okay, we'll let go, let's try out. No, they will not accept it.
That
It's
is,
a very tough.
you can only be responsible for your culture. You can't be responsible for others' culture. So
Okay.
the moment you come to terms with the fact that I am responsible for my culture and to extend help is my culture, you extend help. If they don't need it, leave them. There are so
Let
many
go.
others to extend help to who want
Because
it.
do I diversify in reading, writing, or listening to something else, you know, like
Yes.
a fast dance or sometimes a classical dance. Sometimes I write, I sometimes draw to keep myself busy in that case. Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen ji. The last question for the evening, Padmini. Please unmute yourself.
Namaskar, sir. I was very, very happy to listen to all what you said last time as well as this time. I have one question. For small
Yes.
children, we say you have a devil inside you and you have an angel inside you. It depends
Yes.
on you whom you want to listen to. Am I right, sir?
Absolutely right. Devil is your own mind and the angel is your instinct or your soul, which is
Thank you, sir.
inside. And the two of them are constantly talking and constantly arguing also. You teach
Thank
him
you.
that small voice inside your mind is guiding you. So if you listen to it, you'll be happy. And if he learns that young, his life is made. Most of the time, we learn it after all our hair is white.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Gokani, for this lovely evening and
Thank you.
more and more thoughts that you're adding to us and knowledge. And it's never enough, as I said. So for all the others who are here, thank you once again for being with us until this late evening. And Ishita has already posted a lot of links. We are having weekend sessions. Some of them are live, some of them are recorded. So please feel free to click on them and you can register for yourself. So thank you once again. And don't forget to give your feedback in the link that you will be receiving in your WhatsApp chat, or when you log off on this session, when you end the session, you will have a feedback link there. Please give your feedback. It feels good to bring to you different topics, to take your suggestions and also understand about how you enjoyed the session. How did you like the session today? Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Binda. And
Don't
Don't
forget to register your next Friday. Block your seat next Friday, because every time everyone is saying the class is full, they're not getting to book their seats. So try and book it right away. Thank you, Dr. Gokani.
Thank you, Binda. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ishita, for all your support. All the best.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.